Now the other type of operators are the comparison operators that allow you to compare two values and return a Boolean value, either true or false. So the first comparison operator is the equal to, and this is always represented with two equal signs. So this operator checks if two values are equal. So for example, let's say that we have a variable a, and a has a value of 80, and then b has a value of 70, then c has a value of 80. So if we are to print the result, so we are going to have result, I think we can first of all have to define a variable called result1, whereby this variable is going to check if a is equal to b. So I'll go ahead and pass it in here. So result1, then run the file. So we are getting false. So what happens behind the scenes is that when the function is called, we pass in values of a and b are passed in, whereby 80 is passed in, and then same applies to 70. So this expression checks whether 80 is equal to 70. And you ask yourself, is 80 equal to 70? No. Then that means that the expression is going to return false. That is where we are getting false. So how about if we have another variable called result2 that checks if a is equal to c? So I'm going to go ahead and pass in this other variable called result2 and run the file. So when I run the file, we are getting true, because when the function is run, value for a, which is 80, is passed in, and same applies to value 80, which is for c. So in other words, this expression checks whether 80 is equal to 80, and we know that these values are equal. Then that means that the expression is going to result to true. So the other comparison operator is the not equal to, and it's represented with an exclamation mark followed by an equal sign. So this operator checks if two values are not equal. So for example, we can print a result that checks if a is not equal to b, and we know that 80 is not equal to 70. Then that means that the expression has to return false. So when this expression is run, 80 is going to be passed in, and then 70 is going to be passed in. So in other words, you ask oneself, is 80 not equal to 70, which is true? Then that means that this function has to go ahead and return true, because 80 and 70 are not equal. So that's why we are getting the output as true. Now we also have the greater than comparison operator that checks if the left value is greater than the right value. So for example, we are having a and b. So we are going to go ahead and print an expression that checks if a is greater than b. So we know that a is 80 and b is 70. So is 80 greater than 70? True. So we expect that the value returned has to be true, because 80 is greater than 70. So this is what we are having. So the other operator is the less than operator that checks if the left value is less than the right value. And this is how we represent it. It's more like the left hand sign. So with this expression on line 22, we check whether 80, oh my bad, this has to be a less than sign symbol. So we check whether 80 is less than 70. So in other words, you ask yourself, is 80 less than 70, which is false, because we know that 80 is greater than 70. So this has to evaluate to false. So let me try to run this up. And this is what we get. We also have the greater than or equal to operator, which checks if the left value is greater than or equal to the right value. For example, let's say that we are trying to check for cases whereby 80 is greater or equal to 70. So that means that this has to be greater or equal to. So we pass in the equal signs. So we know that 80 is greater than 70. That means that this expression has to evaluate to true. And true, and that is right because it evaluates to true. And still the same expression can be updated to cater for value, to cater for variable c, where we check whether a is greater or equal to c. So in other words, 8 is going to be passed in as a value for a, then the other 8 is also going to be passed in as a value for c. So this expression returns true for cases whereby either the value on the left side is greater than the value on the right side, or if the value on the left side is equal to the value on the right side. So that means that this expression has to also evaluate to true because 80 is equal to 80. And that's true because this is what we are getting. Lastly, we also have the less than or equal to comparison operator that checks if the left value is less than or equal to the right value. Now, for the first expression where we are having 80 less than or equal to 70, you ask yourself, is 80 less than or equal to 70? No. So that means that this is false. And for the other expression, is 80 less than or equal to 80? Then this evaluates to true because at least 80 is equal to 80. So this evaluates to true. And you can pretty see that when I try to run the function, this is what we are getting. Oh, so I think we can also update the comments for the value outputted, where for the not equal, so is 80 not equal to, is 80 not equal to 70? And that is true because 80 is not equal to 70. And is 80 greater than 70? This will be true. Then is 80 less than 70? This is false because 80 is greater than 70. So let's have a practical example of how we can work with the comparison operators by working with a number comparison tool. And in this example, we will create a simple program that prompts the user to enter two numbers and then compares them using the comparison operators. So firstly, we are going to create two variables that are going to store the two numbers. So the variable name for the first number can be maybe number 1. And the value for this case, we are going to work with the program in a way that we prompt the user to enter the value for each number. And the way we work with this is by working with the input function. And the input function always takes in a string literal. So whenever you try to hover, you can pretty see the value for each function. So they're telling us that read a string from the standard input. And for this case, since it is user defined, we can pass in any string literal. So we are going to say enter the first number. And whenever we work with the input function, the type of the variable number 1 is going to be of type string, and you can pretty see this str. So for that case, we have to cast with the fact that we are going to be working with numbers for the comparison operation. We have to cast. In other words, you have to change the type from a string to either a float or an integer. So for my case, I'm going to work with the int type, and this is going to be the same case for the second number, and the difference is going to be in the variable name. So, and same applies to the string literal. Enter the second number. So having declared these variables, we now have to make use of the comparison operators to compare the numbers. So for this case, we are going to work with the if-else condition, whereby we work with it for cases whereby we want to make conditions on particular expressions. So for the first condition, we are going to check if the number is greater than, and then for the second condition, we are going to check if, for example, the first number is less than the second number, and then the last condition, we are going to check whether both numbers are equal. So whenever we are working with the if-else condition, if we are having 3 conditions, as you can see, that means that we are only going to cater for 2 conditions, and then the last condition will be catered for by the else part. So let's see how this works practically. So this is going to be if. So if the first number, number 1, is greater than the second number, which is number 2, then we are going to print a simple statement, and for this case, I'm working with the f-string formatter, such that we pass in the first value. For example, the first number is greater than then we pass in the second number, which is number 2. Then if this condition is false, we shall use the else if, then we pass in first number such that it is less than the second number. Then we are going to go ahead and copy this first statement and make reuse of it. Oh, my bad. So I'll copy this up and paste it here. So the output for this case is going to be number 1 is less than the second number. So for cases whereby both conditions, the first condition and the second condition, are false, we do not have to make use of this equal in a way that you're saying else if number 1 is equal to number 2. You only have to work with the else keyword in a way that it's only going to print the statement provided in its block if the first 2 conditions are false. So this is going to be else, such that we'll print the statement as num1 is equal to, so this is going to be is equal to num2. So having created our simple program, I'm going to go ahead and run it. So for this case, I'm going to first of all comment all these other statements out. So whenever you are working with the if-else statements, you have to take note of the indentation. So you can see that this space is being indented for all cases, meaning that if you went ahead and removed the indentation, you are going to have errors in a way that the if-else statements always work with the indentation. So for that case, the syntax is going to be invalid. So I'm just going to do a Ctrl-Z such that we have what is right. And I'm going to go ahead and run the program. So I'll open the terminal. And the file that we are running at this point of time is the comparison operators. So this is going to be Python comparison operators dot py. Okay, my bad. So actually the file path is not the valid one. So within my basics main folder, I do have a subfolder for the operators. So I have to first of all change directory into that operators subfolder. So we do cd. Cd means change directory, then directory name. So this is going to be operators. So while I'm within the operators directory or the subfolder, I can now access the comparison operators.python file. So you can see that we are now executing the program, and at runtime we have to pass in the values. So for the first number we can work with maybe 80, and for the second number we can work with 49. So you can see that we are getting the output as 80 is greater than 49. So the way the program runs, or the way the program is actually executed, is that, for example, when we pass in 80 and 49, 80 is substituted for the variable number 1 and 49 is substituted for the variable number 2. So this condition checks whether 80 is greater than 49, and if the condition results true, for this case we know that 80 is greater than 49, that means that the program is going to print this statement on line 41, where 80 is greater than 49. So in addition, these other print statements, like the one of less than and equal to, are not executed because of the fact that their conditions are false. So let's try to work with different values. So for this case, if we do enter 80 and 80 for all cases, you can see that we are having the output as 80 is equal to 80. So for this case, the program passes in both values for the variables, and it first of all checks for the first condition, is 80 greater than 80 false. So since the condition for this case is false, this statement is not going to be executed. Then the program moves to the next condition, where it checks if 80 is less than 80, and this is false because both numbers are equal. So since the condition returns false, then that means that this statement is not going to be executed. So with the fact that both the first two conditions are false, the program is then going to print the last statement by all means. So that is why we are having the output as 80 is equal to 80. So lastly, let's also try it up with a different value. So this case we can work with 49 and 90 such that the second value is greater. So you can see that 49 is less than 90. So meaning that the program passes in 49 and 90, and for the first condition it is false. So it's not going to go ahead and print this statement. Then it moves back to the second condition. So is 49 less than 90, which is true. So with the fact that this condition is true, it's going to go ahead and execute or print out this statement. Now let's look at another example of how to work with our comparison operators by creating a simple program for a login system. And in this example, we'll build a simple script that checks if a user provided username and the password match the predefined credentials. So the comparison operators are used to validate if the entered data is correct for this case. So the first thing we are going to do is to create variables that are going to store one, the username, and such that at compile time, the username is going to be a precise one, so we can segregate. And then the password for the user is going to be assigned to a value of some simple characters. For example, you can just say great 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to go ahead and comment this out as stored user credentials. So having stored the user's credentials, we now have to get the user input. And since it is a simple login system, we have to prompt the user to enter both the username and the password. So this can be inputted name or username, such that we assign the value to the input function since the user is going to enter these details. So we tell the user to enter your username. Then we also cater for the password. So having created those dynamic variables, we are now going to work with the comparison operators to validate the login credentials. So still we are going to work with the if-else statements. So for the first condition, we want to check if the user's inputted username is equal to the stored username, and also if the user's inputted password is equal to the stored password. So this is going to be if the inputted username is equal to the stored username. So we know that for someone to be able to log in, both the inputted username and the inputted password must be equal to the stored username and password respectively. So with the comparison operators, we also have the ability of working with the logical operators. And for this case, since all conditions must be true, we have to work with the AND logical operators. So I'm going to access the AND operator, then we pass in the inputted password such that it is also equal to the stored password. So the AND operator ensures that the user is only going to log in successfully only if this condition is true, in a way that the inputted username is equal to the stored username, and only if the inputted password is equal to the stored password. So both conditions must be true. So once both conditions are true, we shall go ahead and return a simple message to the user that you have successfully logged in, or login was successful. So once this condition is not true, in a way that either the user's stored name is not equal to the inputted username, or the user's inputted password is not equal to the stored password, or both of them are not valid, then you have to go ahead and return a statement to the user that the login failed. So this is a precise approach. So I'm going to go ahead and run the program, and since we are testing part 2, so I'm going to comment this out for now. Oh, and on the other hand, the variables. So enter the username. So we are going to ensure that firstly we pass in the right value, that is the right username that is stored. So this is going to be Goret, and then the password is Goret123. So you can see that the output is login was successful. So how about if we run the same program in a way that we are working with different or cases whereby the username is, for example, false, such that we can say that this is Joanne and then the password is 123. So this returns login failed, and we can also customize this furthermore by saying invalid credentials, such that we run the program and then this can be Joanne, then the password, and then we are having login failed, invalid credentials. Now for a better user experience, it is better if we cater for cases whereby if the username is false, we return the output as invalid username, and for cases whereby the password is false, we return the output as invalid password. So I'm just going to cut this, for example. I'm going to do a Ctrl+Z. We copy this up and bring in the if-else, whereby if the inputted, I think it should, it's better if we start with the username. So if the inputted username is now not equal to the stored username, we go ahead and print this statement. So instead of saying login failed, we are going to say login failed, invalid user name, such that the user is sure of what exactly is the invalid input. Then cases for an invalid password, then this has to evaluate to invalid password. So you can pretty see that we are making use of the not equal to operator. So I'm going to run the program such that we can confirm the output. So enter username, this can be Joy, and then the password. So you can see that we are getting, so for this case, when we enter the username and the password, so the program first of all checks if this condition is true. So for the first condition, it is false. So it goes ahead and executes the second condition, whereby it checks if the inputted username is not equal to the currently stored. And this is true because the currently inputted username is Joy and the stored one is Great. So meaning that it's going to go ahead and print this statement. So for this case, let's try to work with the right values anyway. So this is going to be Goretti, and then the password, I'm going to enter a wrong one. So you can see that it is printing login failed, invalid password. So as always, it's going to first of all check if the first if statement or the first if condition is true. And since both passwords are not right, my bad, and since both conditions are false, it's not going to execute the statement. So it's going to move to the next one, and it checks whether the inputted username is not equal to the currently stored, and this is false since we entered Goretti, and Goretti is the stored username. So that means that by all means it's now going to go ahead and execute the last statement, which is true because the user password that was already stored is not equal to the inputted password. So lastly, let's try to enter the right values for this case, and then the password is correct123. So you can now see that the output is login was successful. So that is it for this session. I hope you found it insightful, and in case you found it insightful, do not forget to like and share. See you again in the next session.